Fish On.
This is the New York Angler Fishing Podcast, brought to you by NYangler.com, your secret spot online. Hosted by the man who introduced New Yorkers to the world of online fishing, Mr. George Skaka.
Hello and welcome everyone to this special edition of the New York Fishing Podcast. My name is George Skaka and I will be your host as I bring you the Director of Marine Fisheries here in New York State, Mr. John Maniscalco. We go through a number of fisheries management issues. And with that said, fisheries management is a very, very complex model. There's just so much there, and it can drill down, and it just keeps going and going and going. And, you know, I'm afraid the average listener, you know, could easily get lost in the, I don't know, hundreds of acronyms that there are across the entire fisheries management field. So for the sake of this conversation and this interview, I wanted to try to give you a brief explanation, at least about the subjects that we're talking about, because, you know, it just drills down and down. So, for example, you are going to hear references to the ASMFC. That is the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And for the most part, they handle fisheries within state waters, so 3 miles out. So what they do is they gather all the data, they do their work. There are many committees, subcommittees, advisory committees. This is where your scientific work goes on, and this is where they collect all the data and do that impossible job of counting fish and locating fish and see where they're moving. So the ASMFC, once they get all this stuff together, they sit down. At this point, I will say it does become somewhat of a political situation, because, you know, you've got the ASMFC represents states from Florida all the way on up the coast. It's the entire coast. So not every state wants the same reg. You know, a bass is smaller here and a fluke is bigger there. And so there's all these micromanaging, what I like to call micromanagement, issues involved in fisheries management. But for the sake of this conversation, when you hear John or I, mention the ASMFC, they make the final decision. So those states vote and they make a decision. I'll give you an example. There was a pushback on certain aspects of the circle hook requirement, which is coming up, which is in effect actually this season. So 4-stripe bass, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But the gist of it is now, they go back to the state and they tell the states, okay, this is what we want you to do. Now, we want you to go to the states and see what they want. And then the states go back and forth and they try to come to an agreement. And then they have this other thing, which is called a conservation equivalency. So some states like New Jersey may end up with, shorter or bigger bass, just because of they're able to come up with this conservation equivalency. So I could just keep going on, and I feel I may be losing people already. So the ASMFC makes the recommendation, comes to New York, and says, hey, in the case of the circle hook, you're not allowed to use any bait on a circle hook when you're fishing for striped bass. So this opens up this huge can of worms. You have a lot of people that troll sandworms or, artificial sandworms with a little bit of bait on there with J hooks. And, when you do that for striped bass, for the most part, it's got to be, I don't even know, obviously I don't know what the exact mortality is, but, and I don't do that kind of fishing, but I know people that do, and I've been on boats and I have done it, and I've never once seen a striped bass come up gut hooked. So there's all these little things that, not that they don't think of them, but they can't possibly think of everything. So they hand it off to the states, and that's where we are now in the case of the striped bass circle hook. And I thought this was a good time to speak, with the DEC, so we could get, the actual word. Look, you hear everything over the internet, Twitter, God knows what, this shutting this down, you can't do this, you can't do that. This, you're going to hear this directly from the man who does this for a living. And I'll also say, and not because, he took this interview, because I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of people who won't take this interview. For example, I've been trying to get a hold of the wind farm people so we could get more of an idea on what's happening with these offshore windmills, which will soon, by the way, pave the entire coast. But let's not even talk about that right now. So John does give us some really good insight. We talk about, which you'll see, we talk about what to expect, where we are with that circle hook, and many other things regarding just about every single fishery that we deal with, from flounder to tautog, and to striped bass and bluefish. And I would like to introduce John Maniscalco. Problem is, it's like about a 15-second piece. Somehow our control room lost it. No matter what I could do, we couldn't get it back. So we come in, we start in, we only missed just a few seconds. So I apologize to you, John, for that, and to the audience, but I really don't think you miss it. It wasn't a heck of a lot. But I will tell you, he does give us a lot of straight information straight from the DEC. So I'd like to welcome Mr. John Maniscalco from the New York State DEC.
A lot of the regulations that, our anglers ultimately experience come down as a result of interstate fisheries mandates. And it is DEC's job to take whatever is being imposed by Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission or the Mid-Atlantic Council and the federal government and implement them in New York State in such a way as to, allow our anglers access to the fishery while at the same time achieving the fishery management plan goals, which is usually to, limit harvest, limit fishing mortality, that kind of thing. So it's not always easy. And I understand the process can be frustrating for anglers, but we do our best to listen to all parties and find that middle path.
Okay.
So I'm currently the Bureau Chief of Marine Fisheries at New York State DEC. I started my career with horseshoe crabs and lobsters, and then I've moved on to finfish and currently, again, oversee all fisheries with the exception of shellfish like clams and oysters.
Okay. So you wouldn't know too much about the die-off of the Peconic Bay scallops. Did they have a harvest? I don't believe they did.
No, unfortunately, we've had 2 years of very severe scallop die-offs, but that's not my area of expertise.
Okay.
So
No problem.
as far as cause, and what steps we'll be taking, that would be better left for someone else to answer.
Okay, great. So, every year we witness or we experience changes in our fisheries regs, and, we know that it's all, to try and save and protect our fisheries and to share them equitably between recreational and commercial fisheries. It's not the easiest thing in the world. I mean, it's tough to count fish, So, and even though the managers do their best, it feels like it's trying to be micromanaged, I feel, in some ways, and there's a lot of regs that are always changing. And but recently, I'm not seeing that. So, So what do we see like coming forward? I mean, we're still going to be at the 3 bluefish limit. Do we see any changes this year, John, regarding rec fisheries, minus the striped bass hook thing? We can talk about that in a few.
Yeah, George, a couple of points. So we do have fisheries the recreational fisheries that seem to change every year, and those are usually fisheries that are associated with a federally managed plan. So that's your fluke, your scup, black sea bass, for example. Those change, certainly in the past, almost on an annual basis. Then you have other fisheries that are managed through the commission, and usually changes for species that are managed by the commission only happen as a result of a stock assessment, which might only happen every 2, 3, or 4 years. So an example of that would be winter flounder or tautog, right? We don't change our tautog rules on an annual basis. We only change them when the assessment comes out and we have to, change fishing mortality, for example.
Right.
So for 2021, so most of our fishery decisions are data driven, and COVID impacted a lot of things, including data collection on recreational harvest, especially. So many of your anglers, your listeners are probably familiar with MRIP, and there's a catch sampling aspect of that program that didn't run during May and June, certainly in New York and many other states. New York State did resume some kind of limited sampling later in the year, maybe starting in June. Some other states did not even resume sampling at all for 2020. Right. So because there is no data and because we don't have any, dependable estimate of what harvest was, the feds have basically allowed status quo measures. So New York State will not be making any changes to its recreational saltwater fishing regulations, and most states on the East Coast would be making only, at most, very, very small modifications, but most states will be maintaining status quo or near status quo.
Okay, great. Now, I also understand, I could be wrong about this, but I thought I read that the tautog commercial tag system that was supposed to go into effect did not, or it was put off or something because of COVID. Am I right about that? Or
that's correct. So New York State was hoping to implement a commercial tautog tagging program, which is ASMSC mandated in 2020. But we were kind of getting prepared to launch that tautog tagging program and then decided to postpone it because of the many complications related to COVID. So both from the DEC staffing side of things and also trying to limit, what is this, ultimately unnecessary contact between commercial fishermen and staff at a time, when we didn't. So we have a better understanding of COVID now, but certainly March and April, COVID was very, very scary, and there were lots of things that were unknown about it. And so for the safety of everybody involved, we decided to postpone that.
I totally get that.
We fully expect, we're moving forward with implementing it for 2021, but we did postpone it last year.
So can you explain a little bit to our listeners exactly what that how that tag system is going to work? And I just want to add a little flavor. I think you know that I'm a staunch supporter, actually, for hook and line only on blackfish. I've always wanted to get a count of the pots, how many are set. If you could give us an idea on, I know that this tagging program work well if it's similar to the striped bass program. But if you can explain to the folks exactly how it works, that would be great.
Sure. There are concerns about the commercial tautog fishery in terms of underreported landings, and also outright poaching. So tautog is a little bit unique in that the vast majority of the value for the tautog fishery lies in the live market. And so what the hope is for this tag program is that fishermen will have to accurately report their tag usage, but because the tags, they receive the tags through DEC. So in order to continue fishing, they have to accurately report on the usage of their tags. And then secondly, it's hoped that it will aid law enforcement in that when law enforcement goes into any kind of a venue that does sell live tautog, every tautog in those tanks is going to have a tag through its cheek. And so obviously the trick here is finding a tag that could be put in fish and would not affect their mortality and allow healthy fish to continue sold live. So that's the kind of the idea behind this live tagging program for commercial tautog. Okay.
Now that we're on this subject, I know it. I always wonder why. I see photos. I got one the other day for live tautog at $24.99 a pound. And, they're in tanks and they're being sold openly. Now, I get you guys are undermanned, but, it's right there out in the open. Is there ever any consequence brought against these restaurants themselves, or... I mean, not that you turn the other eye. I know that to turn the other cheek or whatever, but I know that, it's happening. We all know it. I mean, I see pictures every day of it. And I was wondering, why they can get away with doing something like that continuously.
Well, George, I mean, some of those fish that are caught were legally caught and they're being legally sold.
Right.
If they're undersized or, moving into the future, if they are not tagged, well, that would be an illegally caught and an illegally sold fish. And that fish could be confiscated. And yes, so, summonses could be issued.
Okay.
So I mean, again, the goal, one of the major goals of the tag program is to aid enforcement in these kinds of situations.
Okay. One more on blackfish and then we'll move on. So I've been an advocate for years, as I said before, with getting a count or a permit system in place, similar to what you had with lobster, to find out who has pot. I don't need to know the person, just need to know how many pots people have. They should be marked. Again, like lobster, that's just the way I feel. I feel we need a count of pots. I mean, we all heard the stories of the part-time school teacher who's got 1,000 pots set. They're only allowed. I mean, most of these guys, you talk to, they have hundreds of pots set. They're only allowed 25 fish in a day. So why do they need so many pots? Has the department ever considered limiting the number of pots? But I guess now with the tags, you don't need to do that. But, I really feel that we need to get a count on the pots so we can get an idea, on exactly how many fish are being targeted. And the other thing is, I mean, it's a good way to... for DEC possibly to generate some money. I mean, they should have a permit on those fish. They should be paying to take those fish. It's the same exact way they pay for striped bass. So at least that's the way I feel. And I do you plan on getting a hold of these pots and so we know whose pots are whose, or is that not in the outlook right now?
So, I mean, fishermen have to report how many pots they're using on their vessel trip reports. Mm-hmm. And regulations also require that fish pots be identified and buoyed. So if a pot does not have identification with that, fisherman license number, then that pot is not properly marked. And if that pot does not have a buoy, then it is not properly marked. And our regulations do require that. In terms of limiting the number of pots each fisherman fishes, that's not something we've seriously considered at this point. And I will also add that, pots can be used to capture other species, not just tautog. So 25 fish only really applies to tautog fisheries. Black sea bass has trip limits on a daily basis, 50, 70 pounds, maybe a little larger in the future. Scup has trip limits of 600 to 800 pounds a day. You have to consider other fisheries that those pots could be used for, not just blackfish alone.
Okay, I got it. All right, so pretty much things are going to be the same this year outside of this new circle hook requirement, which came down from ASMFC. So I just want to talk a little bit about it. I mean, I can see, it's great to see that, you listen to the people, and when the letters went out regarding the tube and worm fishermen that, were really concerned, and because they're not gut hooking any fish. So, I saw all that. I saw you guys were listening. I said it. I don't know if you checked my website, but I said it from the beginning. I'm like, look, they're listening. You need to let them know, what you want or what's bothering you, and they're going to respond. So I see now there's like a requirement that they're going to allow the tube, the tube and regular, J-hook fishery. But I did want to talk just a little bit about the choice of baits that are not allowed that the state decided on. First question, did you just pull that like from the freshwater? That's what I'm wondering, because I see it's got salamanders, frogs, toads. I mean, nobody's using those in salt, and then the one that really got me, of course, I mentioned is tapioca. Now, what the heck? Who's using tapioca to catch striped bass? I guess there must be like some kind of fishery somewhere. Can you talk a little bit about what went into you deciding what can be used and what can't be used? Or did you kind of just take some of the stuff from freshwater and then added a few freshwaters? And there's also one other thing I wanted to ask, what dough-like scented baits are. So take it away.
Yeah, sure. So I guess to answer one of your first questions is that bait definition is taken directly from freshwater. And it was, kind of a starting place. So, one thing you have to, I hope your readers realize is striped bass, you can find them in the Marine District. Right. You can find them in the Hudson River. Mm-hmm. And the Hudson River does eventually transition up to, essentially full fresh water. And the Marine District for striped bass only goes up to the George Washington Bridge. And and then you've got this next zone, which is, further north of that. Right. And that's for striped bass management now. And the problem we're going to encounter is the natural bait definition for freshwater will apply, right, on the Hudson River for most of its length where striped bass is fished. Yeah. So what we're going to encounter now is, potentially a different bait definition, as soon as you cross the bridge, right? So while that's a nice, clear line, from a enforcement perspective, that's one of those things that will drive an angler crazy, that they can use one kind of bait here, but on the other side of that bridge, they're not going to be able to use that bait.
Oh, I can hear it now.
Not only was it it was an easy first step for us to take the same bait definition, but it also would have helped enforcement and also kind of removed any kind of confusion. Now, we do listen, and the regulation that, thus far is a proposed rule. And the point of a proposed rule is to allow the public to give public comment. And we will be taking public comment on that proposed rule through March 8th. So if your listeners are interested, by all means, they can provide us with input on what they think should and should not be included in the definition of natural bait, in the Marine District, specifically for striped bass. But just be aware that if we ever have to go to any kind of a bait definition in the Marine District, moving forward, it's likely that we're not going to want to have one definition for, weak fish and one definition for striped bass. So, but we certainly, I think we've heard a lot from our anglers. ASMFC has heard a lot from coastal anglers. We fully intend to, incorporate the feedback we get from ASMFC and from New York State's, recreational saltwater anglers when we kind of come up with our final rule. Now, I did not know the basis for tapioca, George, but I did ask some of my my biologists to work more in freshwater, and they did provide me with some information. So tapioca pearls can be kind of soaked and cooked to become somewhat tough. Mm-hmm. And they can also be impregnated with color to the point where they look like fish eggs. And so they're definitely used in fresh, or certainly have been used in the past in freshwater fishing for things like trout. So there is a use for them, certainly in freshwater fishing, but I agree that it's questionable whether anyone would fish with, tapioca pearls all that much in saltwater. Amazing. All these years I'm doing this, I had no idea people use tapioca as bait. Never. So, I'd like to take a minute or two to discuss the burden which I don't know, how much you want to talk about enforcement. This would be up to you. But, I mean, how many officers, especially now with COVID, how many officers are, protecting our 1,000 miles of shoreline? When I say protecting, doing the best job that they possibly can. I mean, if you had the National Guard line all of Long Island, you still couldn't stop people from breaking these laws. I think you'll agree they're mostly, it's up to the fishermen. And even though should they break the law, they should pay for it. Most of them don't, but I'm curious as to the situation with enforcement now in this day and age of COVID. So I would say that dedicated Marine officers have always been, few and far between. But they've also always been assisted by what we might say is your more general regional officer. So Marine Resources might have, anywhere from, somewhere in the order of 4 people dedicated to Marine enforcement. But then the regional officers would assist them. So, you're correct. That's not a whole lot given the amount of coastline. Now, under COVID, certainly our enforcement officers, just like many other parts of DEC and many other state agencies, a lot of people are volunteering on things related to COVID relief. Whether it's so the officers might be working security and that kind of thing at some of our COVID testing and COVID vaccination sites. Mm-hmm. What was already stretched is even, further stretched under COVID. Yeah, it kind of feels, with what we're dealing with today and, you and I talking about circle hooks and bait and, 5 years ago, it would probably really be a big deal. But today, it just isn't as big a deal. But I will tell you, and I'm sure you'll agree, there is no better stress relief than fishing. And to get out in the air, can't wait for this winter to be over. And so we could get back out there. John, I did want to ask you, I don't know if this is in your realm or if you have any opinion on this, but the Long Island Sound is obviously going through some type of a change. I've fished it now my whole entire life, and I'm very old. And and I've seen it change. Years ago, there was no fluke there.
then for 30 years we had great fluke, and now they seem to be disappearing and more sea bass are moving in. Does the department have, or do you, or is there, do you folks look at this change as it's happening? Do you see it? Do you, take that into account when making regulations? Or, like right now, the fluke fishery in the Long Island Sound, it seems to be going away. And everything I see is the water temperatures jumped like a degree in the past decade or something on the bottom. So I was just wondering if you had any input on that.
Taking that into consideration when we're crafting regulations, you have to realize that we're crafting regulations for all of New York, and that's not just Long Island Sound. So I can't say we can take into consideration changes we're seeing specifically in Long Island Sound when we're crafting regulations. But certainly we're aware that, the ecosystem in general is changing, and, some of those things might be felt more sharply in Long Island Sound. Temperatures are certainly rising. So my experience fluke fishing in Long Island Sound has not been great from a keeper perspective, but I've pulled up lots and lots of shorts from Long Island Sound, certainly. So fluke are still using Long Island Sound, but it might be a little harder to come across a keeper. And, without doing some, real analysis, it's difficult to kind of separate what's going on with the fluke population overall with how that might differ from, that segment of the fluke population that's choosing to use Long Island Sound. Now, we've certainly, Connecticut has that trawl survey that they've been doing in Long Island Sound for a long time, and they did do some analysis of that data. There's some published articles on the work that shows that, it's going through, kind of a regime shift, going from a cooler water collection of species to a warmer water collection of species. Now, fluke is generally included in that warmer water collection of species. And like I said, I've seen a lot of shorts,
Right.
Haven't had a lot of success finding keepers, but certainly there's been a lot of scup in Long Island Sound. There's been more sea bass than ever in Long Island Sound.
Absolutely.
So things are certainly changing. There's been plenty of bait in Long Island Sound. So why fluke are a little hard to come by, I can't tell you. But I don't think it's too attached to water temperature.
Okay.
But, I really don't know for certain.
All right. So we basically covered, most of our fish. What I see in the Sound is like a gazillion porgies. They're like everywhere. And I caught some nice fluke, but it seems like that second and third wave that we're used to seeing, I don't know, maybe they're going somewhere else. So one other thing I want to talk about, the winter flounder, a lot of people, till this day, it's still their favorite fishery. At one time, it was the number one targeted fish, in all waters, right? So the offshore fishery, according to what I see with the commercials, they seem to be doing fine, those fish offshore. Do you have any clue as to what's happening inshore with these flounder? And is there any plan in the future to take further regs? Or, I don't know how much more you can do. What are we down to 1-2 fish? So, anything on that, John?
So I'm not aware of any certainly interstate mandates upcoming, to change. Winter flounder, that stock assessment has been kind of bouncing around, at between 13 and 16% of kind of your target biomass in southern New England, at least for a while now. And like you said, the ocean fishery seems to be doing better than the inshore fishery. Now, I guess, I'm not sure how much your listeners are aware, but, so while we consider it the southern New England stock, there's a lot of reason to believe that the fish that live in the bays are genetically distinct from the fish that live off in the ocean. And then there's also kind of a third contingent that actually moves in between the bay and the ocean. So you've got a really complicated population structure. Dr. Michael Frisk he's a researcher at Stony Brook University's School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences, and so he's been kind of documenting this complex population structure and looking at the genetics of it, tagging fish and seeing where they go and when they return. And so we know that fishing pressure was incredible in the 80s, right?
Yeah,
and certainly
ridiculous.
Played its role in knocking things down. And then you do have this changing environment. You have warming water. You might have some, pollution issues and other habitat damage and stressors that have prevented that those inshore stocks from recovering. And you kind of noted, New York State's currently at 2 fish and a 60-day season. And that is incredibly restrictive, and I'm not insensitive to that fact. And I also know that flounder fishing has a special place in many people's hearts. But I think in order to kind of continue to protect those little remnants of our bay populations that we do have, I think you have to, continue to keep those regulations really, really strict.
I'm with you.
And even the fisheries that operate in the ocean, at least in New York State, you still have a very low trip limit for commercial fishermen, and you still have those same 60-day and 2 fish limits. And it's all kind of protecting the remnants that we still find in our bays.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, it's up to me. But so thing I wanted to ask you about is bunker. Now, I don't know if you're probably aware that, we passed that bill years ago, worked really hard to get the reduction boats out. And now we're seeing, I've never seen so much bait. Every year class of bunker that you could think of. We've got whales that are, 30 foot of water sometimes right off the beach. We're seeing things that we've really never seen, but I'm hearing rumblings in the background that there may be too many bunker. And when I hear that, that scares me. So I was wondering if the department is looking at anything, because I know there was a couple of fish kills, even though they're natural. If we check the history, those fish kills have happened forever. But I was wondering if the department is looking at anything, or, I'm hoping that the bill we put together kind of restricts it, but anything on that?
So I haven't heard, at least in the fisheries circles, anyone suggest that there's too many bunker. And as you know, not only do the whales and a lot of the marine mammals we have around here and the sharks depend on bunker, striped bass also depend on bunker. Mm-hmm. And the ASMSC recently moved to manage bunker kind of on a multi-species basis, considering the needs of things like striped bass. And that recent 10% cut to the commercial harvest of bunker was done in order to kind of allow the bunker biomass to, sustain at a level that will support a larger striped bass population. So I haven't heard anything about too many bunker. I think near New York State, so not only do you have this you have a really large bunker population right now, and you also have these changing ocean conditions that I don't necessarily know if we fully understand exactly why, but New York State's been awash in bunker, and it has led to incredible wildlife viewing opportunities. Everything. So I think that in general, it's a positive. But yes, when you have a lot of bunker together, and maybe things stay warm enough that those bunker don't leave, late in the season, then you get the other side of things where you occasionally get fish kills, and whether that's because the fish are getting too cold or whether they're packed together. And anytime you pack a lot of fish together, together, you have the potential for, diseases to spread. So we have had some fish kills, and people certainly don't like seeing dead fish on their beaches. But, it's largely part of some natural processes, and we haven't seen anything that is alarming at a population scale. So.
Okay, well, that sounds good. Well, John, look, I really want to thank you for joining me here. I never look forward to going to any of your hearings. No offense. I think the last one I was at, I got up to speak and remember the light went on fire over my head. I thought that was...
I remember that.
I thought that was a sign from above. I'm like, okay, I better get out of here. But
yep.
So, and, I got to hand it to you. I don't know how you do it, but I really do appreciate this call and you updating our fellow New York anglers on what's coming up and the striped bass circle hook. Oh, wait, one last thing. So I'm going to give you a scenario. Look, there's a billion scenarios, but I'm going to give you one scenario. So I'm fluke fishing, right? I have a bucktail with a piece of squid on it. I catch a slot bass. What happens? Am I supposed to throw them back, or can I put them in the boat? These are the things we always run into in fisheries management. So, our regulations do address that scenario. Okay.
I say the proposed rule addresses that scenario.
Okay.
And right now, the proposed rule says if you catch a bass using bait on a J hook, or a non-circle hook, we'll say, you should release that fish. That's what they says right now.
Okay.
And it was written that way to kind of aid enforcement. Otherwise, everyone's going to be going for fluke or bluefish or something else other than striped bass and catching a bass, and that allows them to keep it. And the goal of the rule, or at least, our intentions in implementing the rule, was always to aid enforcement. Now, ASMSC is going to be considering that exact question. How are we going to handle the legal bass caught on a non-circle hook with bait? And I think that it's likely that we will take whatever guidance they provide on that issue pretty seriously. But right now the proposed rule would require you to throw it back. We were challenged on that point at our Marine Resource Advisory Council. There are other commissioners on ASMSC concerned with that exact issue, and so we're definitely going to be looking to ASMSC for some guidance on that, because what you have to balance there is the enforceability of the rule with angler satisfaction. So we'll see how that turns out. But if you have an opinion on the matter, or if your listeners have an opinion on the matter, please submit comments. So, because we will be considering a lot of comments when it comes to how the final rule looks on this.
Oh, that's great. I'm really glad we got to that point. So, all right, John, once again, I want to thank you. I want to thank the DEC for the fine job that you guys are doing in these tough conditions. I'd like to also thank all, and I know many, which you know that I do, that are out there right now working some of your COVID facilities. And I want to thank you once again for joining us here. And I look forward to doing this again next year, or maybe before. But I really appreciate the access, John. I appreciate everything, the feedback that you've given here, because anglers really don't often get to hear it. And if you go to a hearing, you really, it's tough to get anything out of them. So, but I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time. And, one more thing. So when is your new building going to be finished? I keep my boat right there in the Nessequa.
Oh, yeah. So we expect to be moving in, I think, right now I've heard somewhere June, July.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So.
That's moving. Well, good. I'll have to stop in and say hello. I'll knock on the door. Oh, I'll wave as I'm driving by with some fish out the window.
Okay.
All right, John.
Stay safe.
Thank you. So there you have it, folks. I'd like to once again thank John Maniscalco and the rest of the New York DEC for allowing this interview. I hope to bring you more from the experts here in New York and along the coast as we go along this season. I know it's not the most listened to episode, although it's up there, these fisheries management episodes, but they are important. And if I reach just, a handful of people that are able to open their eyes and see what the heck is going on and be involved, because we need people involved, then I did my job. And I would like to close this out with saying that I've been around this thing, this whole fisheries management things, at a time when I swear I would go to a meeting and I was the only person in the whole room, besides the people that were there. This was, it was 30 years ago. It was pre-internet days. But then the Rex organized, and the New York Sport Fishing Federation, which is still around today, doing some really good work. They organized, and we were finally heard. But a lot of that was missing in the past few years. And, I have to say that this change from a club or group speaking on behalf of people is no longer as effective as it was in the past. And what I mean by that is everyone has their own personal voice now, which can be heard and which is heard when you're sending a email out. Or maybe you're part of a survey. I can tell you that New York, was kind of on the fence about the slot and which way to go. And I can tell you that they watched all the surveys, and they watched on all these websites and Facebook and wherever fishermen were gathering. And they can get more data on what we're doing today just by looking at it. And therefore, you have more access and a very strong effect by sending your comments in. So I have to tell you, I've never seen, and I don't mean any disrespect to the past folks in the DEC, because, I always truly like those people. But I truly feel that we have more access today, and, more, it's just open. So, again, I want to thank the DEC and John for coming on the show. I look forward to, maybe we'll get an annual update as we move into each season. And I'd also like to bring you the other aspects of what New York State DEC does and brings to the marine environment. I think you'd all be surprised. I mean, I know you would be surprised. So as we go through the season, please watch for these special episodes. I thank you all again, to all my supporters and listeners and growing base. I truly, truly appreciate it. Please be sure to subscribe. Comments are always great. So, and please, once again, remember, I know now is not the time. I know it's a little cold and there's a little ice. And if you're like me, you don't like to fish like that. But remember, fishing is right around the corner. It's time to get ready for everything. And I hope to bring more of this type of information to you folks as the season moves along. So get through this last stretch, bad, tough stretch of cabin fever, because it won't be too long until the striped bass arrive.
Angler Podcast. You can find more on fishing New York waters at nyangler.com, your secret spot online.